Hi everybody, thanks very much for joining this talk this afternoon. My name is Dara McCoy. I'm the Program Manager of the Behavioural Economics Unit at SEAI. And I'm going to give a talk with Hannah Julienne, my colleague in the Behavioural Economics team. And we're going to talk for about half an hour or so, focusing on why behavioural science and economics is important for the energy transition, and how we apply that at SEAI. So how it feeds into, us achieving our objectives as an organization, and then give you an overview of some projects that we're working on. Okay, so to give you a quick overview of the talk, we're going to talk about behavioural economics and what it can say, for sustainability, how we're using it at SEAI, and then talk about some specific projects. So focusing on evidence reviews, which we would think of as secondary research, in that we're synthesizing other information that other people have produced, but then also we undertake primary research ourselves. And I should say that this work that Hannah and I are presenting today is the work of the behavioural economics team involving Shalin, who's sitting there in front of me, but also the wider organization at SEAI. So we work very closely with various departments, with our communications team, with our delivery teams, with various parts of the organization. So it's really a collective effort, and also with external collaborators as well, through consultancies or academics. Okay. So, what is behavioral economics? Some of you might wonder. So it's a branch of economics that combines insights from economics and psychology to understand, why do people behave the way that they actually do, okay? And we might say, we have traditional economics, why do we need behavioral economics? Well, traditional economics assumes that people are rational optimizers, so that people have perfect foresight and they're constantly optimizing all of their decisions. They always do what's in their own best interests. And if you think of that in terms of a retrofitting decision, for example, it would mean that people will constantly take advantage of every cost-effective retrofitting opportunity they can do. That's what traditional economics tells us that's how it tells us how people think. But we know that that's not true. We know that people are biased in various different ways. We know that people find it difficult to weigh up complex information, costs and benefits. We know that people find it difficult to make decisions involving time frames looking far into the future. And behavioral economics tries to understand where these biases or where these heuristics that people have that affect our decision making, and really try to help us understand these, and with the aim of making better decisions. Okay. And why is it relevant to sustainability? Well, you might say that, behavior can only get us so far, that we need regulatory changes, we need new technologies, we need, deep structural changes, and that's all true, but the vast majority of them will be accompanied by some element of behavioral change. Okay, so the IPCC report estimate that lifestyle and behavioral changes can result in about 40 to 70% of the emission reductions we need by 2050. Some similar numbers from the IEA, who estimate that about nearly 2/3 of the energy reduction required to meet net zero is going to involve some element of behavioral change. And that could involve behavioral changes with existing technologies, like consuming less electricity, or running your appliances in a more efficient mode, or it could involve investment behavior, like buying an electric vehicle, or more longer term shifts, but that will involve for example, the public acceptance of carbon taxes or other factors that we need to change in our societies. So behavior is going to be a key component of any efforts we make to achieve our climate targets. So what do we do at SEAI? Well, you're probably familiar, and a lot of people, when they think of SEAI, they think of grants, okay? They think, SEAI is the organization that hands out government grants, and obviously that's true. But there are various other parts to the organization as well. So essentially, that's covered by the program delivery arms of the organization. So we have national retrofit, and we also have the business, public sector, and transport. But there's also a corporate services department which supports all of these functions and makes sure the organization works okay. But then we have a policy and research insight department, which is made up of research and technology and data and insights. And the behavioral economics unit is within the data and insights department. And essentially our role is to design trials and interventions that inform the delivery of our programs, but also to then evaluate the programs and try to improve them. And the idea is that there's a virtuous cycle of evaluation and then of innovation with our delivery side. And then ultimately we play an advisory role with the Irish government, but also with organizations in Ireland and internationally. So the behaviors we target are informed by the climate action plan. So they're the type of behaviors that we need to undertake in order to achieve our targets, which ultimately informs SEAI objectives. And so, at a high level, these relate to home retrofit, these relate to heat pump or renewable heating system adoption, they relate to electric vehicle adoption. But we're also interested in how people use behavior, or how people behave and use the technologies that they already have. So, what types of habits do people have? How do people heat their homes? How do people use water? All of these factors are things that we're interested in trying to understand better so that we can then design interventions to try to, maximize emission reduction. And broadly speaking, we do this in a few different ways. So we have a set of evidence review papers. I'm going to talk in detail about one of them now in a minute. We undertake primary research, which Hannah, my colleague, is going to give a couple of examples of the type of primary research we do. And then all of this informs, both SEAI activities, as I've said, and also, the advisory role that we play as part of our function. Okay, so evidence reviews. So I'm going to talk in more detail now about a paper that we just published today, or possibly yesterday, on our website, called Promoting Retrofitting Among Homeowners in Ireland Through a Behavioural Lens. And this is work that we commissioned. It was led by the Behavioural Insights team in the UK. And it's really trying to understand, what are the barriers in terms of retrofitting, in this current day in Ireland. And we know there's a lot of evidence around the barriers and drivers and factors that encourage people to retrofit, but we wanted to synthesize all of this stuff, pull it all together, but then situate it in the current context in Ireland. So we know that there's a cost of living crisis. We know that energy prices have risen quite a lot recently. We know that there's a housing crisis. We know that all of these factors are going to have an impact on retrofitting options. But equally, we know that there's a lot of supports for people. So we know that there are one-stop shops and better energy homes. I know the scheme has, it's not called that anymore, but we have various types of grant support. There's also increasing amounts of low-cost finance coming on stream. So there's lots of supports for people in addition to barriers. And we wanted to try and pull all this stuff together and look at what solutions could we recommend to address any behavioral barriers given all of this stuff that's happening. So what we mean by retrofitting and the behaviors that we're focused on with this report are the ones on the left-hand side, so really focused around the fabric of the building, less so around installing solar panels, installing heat pumps, and replacing wood or gas burners and stoves. Now, and the reason we're doing that is that we previously have a couple of papers looking at the EV adoption and looking at heat pump uptake. So we wanted to focus on retrofitting specifically with this report, but acknowledging that in order to achieve our targets, it's often going to involve a retrofitting and installing a heat pump or an installation of a renewable heating system. But the focus for this one is on retrofitting. So the first thing that we need to do is to try to map out what would be a typical customer's journey when they're going along this road. And we've set this out in 6 different stages. And this is somewhat of an abstraction in that it's quite general in some ways, but we think it captures the key steps that somebody would go through. At the first stage is a trigger stage where somebody will be will be prompted to retrofitting by, a life cycle change, like, moving house, or, potentially something like, renovating a home, like noticing an increase in their energy bills. Potentially, if you're a landlord, your tenants could be complaining about their energy costs. That could be, a motivation. Or it could be through, government awareness campaigns. Like, we know that there's been a lot of increased interest in retrofitting, at the same time that there's an energy price crisis, and people are, putting these two things together. People will then, if they're interested at that point, will do some research. That could be informal or it could be formal. It could be through looking at, the home might already have a BER, they might go on to, an installer's website or an SEAI or a one-stop shop website, or equally they might just talk to a local contractor or a family member or somebody like that, but there will be some element of research involved, at which point they may decide to proceed. And at this stage, people will weigh up the various costs and benefits of this decision. And this can be a difficult thing to do. It can be hard to know, well, what is the long-term benefit of doing this? The costs are going to be very salient. So people know it's going to be hassle in terms of they might have to clear out their attic, they might have to do different things. There's going to be an upfront cost. And the costs are very clear and very immediate, but the benefits are distributed over a long period of time. And the financial benefits are difficult to quantify. The comfort benefits are difficult to quantify. The health benefits are very difficult to quantify. So it's a difficult decision for people to make. But if they proceed at that point, they will go and arrange funding. They will arrange for the necessary surveys if they're essentially going through SEAI and applying for a grant and so on. And then ultimately installation will occur. Customers will prepare their homes. And finally, the work will happen, and post-installation, customers will then, live in their homes, use energy in their new homes, and hopefully at that point, start to appreciate some of the benefits of making this decision. But equally, if things don't go as well as they hoped, then, people might, and I think, whether it's positive or negative, it might prompt people at that point to talk to friends and family and pass on information about how it went. So that's essentially how we're setting out this kind of 6 stages of somebody's retrofitting journey. But the thing is, there are barriers that could affect people, behavioral barriers that could affect people at every stage along this journey. So, sorry, 12 minutes, okay. So the way we are thinking about barriers in this sense is we're applying what's called a COM-B framework, okay? So it's capability, opportunity, motivation. And you could apply any number of behavioral frameworks, other ones are appropriate, but we're using this one for this project. And essentially it says that basically in order for somebody to undertake this behavior, we need to address some or all of these barriers, okay? And so the capability barriers would relate to somebody's skills, their knowledge, their mobility, their memory, their capacity, essentially their psychological and physical capacity to engage in the behavior in question. Opportunity barriers relate more to time, resources, social norms, or prompts. And then motivational barriers would relate to people's incentives, impulses, their conscious and subconscious decision-making that might influence whether or not somebody undertakes a retrofit. And we can categorize all barriers within one of these groups, but we can also then look at how do these relate to the different stages of the process that somebody has to go through. And thinking about the capability barriers, these could be lack of awareness. People just might not know what the options are. Could be the number of options and decisions, or lack of financial literacy. And basically, these are complex decisions that people are weighing up, okay? And it can be quite difficult to understand what the right thing is for you, okay? So this can create barriers for people. And these barriers will affect people at different stages of the journey. So for example, the lack of awareness, and all of these ones are, are more likely to affect people towards the start. But like lack of awareness, for instance, could affect people at the trigger stage, at the research stage, or at the decision stage, whereas the number of options and decisions is probably more likely to affect somebody at the point that they're making a decision, and they might just procrastinate because this is really difficult and I'm not quite sure what the right thing to do is. In terms of opportunity barriers, the 4 we have identified here are the high cost of retrofit. So despite generous grants and increasing availability of green finance, retrofits still are quite expensive for a lot of people. That can be a barrier. There's split incentives between landlords and tenants. We know that 30% of the population live in rental accommodation. The benefits are that the tenants benefit from a home retrofit in terms of reduced costs. The landlord pays the price, or pays the upfront cost. That creates an incentive problem for landlords to do it. There are supply side issues. We know that and across all sectors or various sectors in Ireland, we have labour shortages and other factors, but that's also prevalent in the retrofit sector. So there's a shortage of skilled workers, and when you think about the level of activity we need to hit our targets over the next few years, that is a massive challenge to kind of ramp up to meet that demand. And then also lack of social opportunity, which is another one. So it's been observed, in academic and other literature that you get to see kind of contagion effects and clusters. So for instance, you see your neighbor with an EV, these kind of things can result in this kind of social network effect, social contagion. It's probably less prevalent with retrofits because you don't observe it so much, but obviously it can still happen. Then in terms of motivation barriers, the ones we have identified here are friction costs and hassle, the moderate perceived benefits, risk aversion, and low consumer trust. And the friction costs and hassle are just that this is a complex process, and there are various friction points the whole way along the journey, and these can affect people in various different places. Again, the moderate perceived benefits, that can affect somebody's motivation to actually undertake this work. Okay, I'm going to keep moving just in the interest of time. But if you're interested, the report is up on our website, and it's available to download. There's an executive summary, which is only about 2 pages long, if you want to just have a scan of it. But then you could do that and maybe find the bits that you're more interested in. But we workshopped solutions. So with the Behavioural Insights team in the UK, we proposed candidate solutions, and we worked with the various delivery teams within SEAI to work through different solutions. And we've identified about 22 possible solutions, which we have prioritized based on potential impact and potential feasibility. So I'm just going to highlight a few of them here today, but there's more in the report. And broadly speaking, solutions, we're thinking about them in terms of addressing the financial barriers, in terms of addressing the hassle and friction that people face, various solutions around the supply side, also in terms of increasing awareness and uptake, and trying to maximize the potential of the BER as an information and motivation source. So I'm not going to talk through all of these, but just taking some of them. So if we think about the financial barriers, as we said, the grants are very generous, but installation costs have increased quite a lot. We know that the green finance is more and more options are becoming available, but we could do more there to fill the gap between what government is providing and what people have to pay. So there is a gap there for the private sector to move into, but also then once these options are there, it can be difficult to understand which is the best one for you. So I think there's two tasks here. One is to essentially increase the green finance offering, but then is to try and make it a bit more digestible for people to understand. In terms of friction, we have a couple of points there, but one is to look at the one-stop shop scheme, for example, and think about, well, how can we improve it? How can we make this as streamlined as possible? But equally, how can we apply this to our other schemes? So, a large kind of objective of the one-stop shop scheme is to reduce administrative burdens and to take the burden away from people. But that could be applied to some of our other schemes as well, and trying to think about how can we make this as easy as possible for people. We've various suggestions made around just trying to essentially ensure a higher flow of skills into the workforce. We are behavioural economists. We're focused more on the demand side, so this is possibly straying a little bit outside of our area, but we think there's still some useful solutions around linking apprenticeship training to the retrofit one-stop shops and some other recommendations that we've made. And I'm going to leave it there for that report, but we also talk about other avenues for potential research that we could undertake. And really what we use these reports for is to inform our operations, but it also really informs what we do as a unit. So it's very useful for us to do these kind of synthesis reports and then decide, well, where should we target with an intervention? And that's essentially what we've done in the past. So we have a number of them up on our website. For example, the EV purchases one of the recommendations from that was to set up the dealership awards to try to create incentives for dealers to boost EV sales. And encouraging heat pump installations in Ireland. As I mentioned, we have already undertaken some work on that, and that prompted us to do some primary research that Hannah is going to talk about now. So I'm going to leave it there for me. I'm going to hand over to Hannah, and we'll both happy to take questions at the end of the talk.
This down. All right. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, so Dara introduced some of the work we've done around evidence reviews, and what I'm going to do now is talk a bit about some of our primary research, which is, when we're actually doing research ourselves to generate new evidence rather than summarizing the evidence coming from others. So I'm going to talk about two studies in particular. So one was around consumers' ability to operate heat pump controls, and the other is a new behavioural energy and travel tracking survey that we launched at the end of last year. So first of all, this study around heat pump controls. So as Dara just mentioned, this study came out of one of the evidence reviews that we ran around heat pump adoption. And, like the retrofitting paper, this kind of went through the customer journey, identifying barriers at various stages that might, stop us realizing the emission savings that we're expecting from heat pump adoption. And one of the things that was picked up on here was the potential for, complicated heating control design to, stop us realizing, on the one hand, our carbon emission savings, but on the other hand, financial savings for the homeowner, which is, important in and of itself, but also because if, homeowners are having a negative experience with their heat pump, then they're probably going to be less likely to recommend it to others. And we know that word of mouth is, very powerful. So because of this, we wanted to look at this a bit further, see, is this actually a thing? Are people finding it difficult to use heat pumps? And is there anything we can do about it? So one of the things we did was run an online experiment. So we had a sample of just over 2,000 participants online, and they saw one of two heat pump models. So this is kind of an online replica that were based on heat pumps that are actually in the market, and it was interactive, so they can click on the buttons as they would in real life, and it would react as you'd expect. And we set them, in each case, we set them 3 tasks to do. So, there was an easy task, which was like setting the temperature. And then there were more complicated tasks as well, like, setting a heating schedule or setting a heat curve. And I'm going to show you first the results from half of the participants who, while they were doing these tasks, they had access to the heat pumps manual. And we found, kind of what we were expecting, that people find it difficult to do these tasks. So the, easier tasks of setting the room temperature, that's okay. People can manage that okay. But anything that's more complicated and the performance really drops. So for example, if you look at Model 1, setting a heat schedule, that's like fewer than a quarter of people that are actually managing to do that correctly. So, as we expected, there is a bit of an issue here. But we also want to know, is there anything we can do to improve that performance? So as I said, half of the participants just had access to the heat pump's standard manual when they were doing these tasks. For the other half of participants, we provided them with kind of a simplified quick start guide, which was just, basically a 1 A4 sheet collection of just step-by-step instructions on how to use different settings on the controls. And what we found was that when people had access to these simplified instructions, we were able to improve their performance by about 11% on average. And we especially saw an increase in performance on the more difficult tasks. So we can improve their performance a bit just by giving them better instructions, although, the baseline performance is still relatively low, of course. So we wrote up the results of this experiment and some other work around this, including a survey in this report here that's available on the website. And in it, we make a number of recommendations for different actors, including heat pump manufacturers and installers. So the recommendations for the manufacturers were, first of all, to actually, test the efficiency of heat pumps under different occupancy scenarios and create clear guidelines for operation based on these results. So this came out of more of a survey where there was some disagreement among manufacturers and installers on what's actually the most efficient way to operate a heat pump. So we need agreement first of all, and then creating clear guidelines for the homeowners themselves. And then the other recommendations are around, designing heat pump controls and interfaces with the user in mind, and carrying out thorough user testing as part of the design process, and to consider developing quick start guides especially for more complex settings that a homeowner might need to adjust. And then for heat pump installers, there's just a very simple recommendation of taking the time to demonstrate how to use heat pump controls when they're installing heat pumps in a home. So that was a quick whiz through one study. So I'm going to talk now about the Behavioural Energy and Travel Tracker Survey. So this is one of 3 pieces of research that we've done over the last year to support both our own communications team and also the department around energy crisis communications. So one of these was an evidence review that I think Dara showed very briefly. So this is a rapid evidence review of communication strategy to encourage energy conservation, which Charlene, who's sitting in the audience, did a lot of work on. We also ran a couple of online experiments to pre-test the framing of communications. But what I'm going to talk about now is this third piece, which is this behavioural tracking survey that we've started running every month to try and get a sense of habitual energy behaviour in Ireland. So what people are doing, how people are using energy on a day-to-day basis. So it's as I said, it's a monthly online survey, and in each case it's run over 7 days, so that we're getting kind of a representative view of the week, with a nationally representative sample of 1,000 people in each case. And the idea behind this is, hopefully most of you have seen some of the Reduce Your Use campaigns, so this government energy saving campaign. So the idea is, on the one hand, to kind of track how energy is being used in the country to see, is this campaign and other efforts to get people to save energy actually working? Are we seeing behaviour change over time? And then on the other hand, to identify any particular behaviours that might need to change that can then inform the communications themselves. And we've run 4 waves of the survey to date, and today I'm just going to show a few results from the first 3 waves. But before I do that, I'm just going to talk a little bit more about what this survey actually involves, because it's a bit different to a standard survey that you might see. So I guess, the problem with running a survey to try and measure behaviour and relying on people's self-reported behaviour is people tend to kind of, see themselves in a positive light. So, if I ask you, like, are you trying to save energy? Are you trying to reduce your home heating? Are you trying to wash your clothes at 30 rather than 40? What you'll probably do is remember all the instances where you do try to do that and kind of maybe slightly forget all the times when you don't do that. So it's not conscious lying, but I think we all do it. We all kind of think of the times when we do try to do things. So in order to kind of get around that and try and get a much more accurate measure of behaviour, we use something called the day Reconstruction Method, which is where we try, instead of asking people about what they're doing in general, we ask them about what they do on one specific day. So, for example, if somebody was completing the survey today, which is Wednesday, we would ask them to think about yesterday, which is Tuesday, and we'd say, just think about Tuesday, even if it isn't a typical day for you, what were you doing? And so then there's 2 steps to this method. So first of all, you ask people to think through the day, think through the day in stages, and they actually type in a box what they did, just to jog their memory. And then the second step is where we ask them more detailed questions about their energy use. So in this case, we're interested on the one hand, their transport use. So we ask them about any journeys they made. And then on the other hand, we ask them about home energy use, so home heating, hot water use, cooking and appliance use. And we also ask them a whole range of other questions, the answers of which we might then want to relate back to behaviour. So for example, whether someone is aware of the Reduce Your Use campaign. So it's quite early days still for this survey, but I'm just going to show you a couple of early results that kind of give a flavour of the kind of thing we can get with it. So first of all, on the travel side, so we first of all asked people, how many journeys they made yesterday. And, you can see this has stayed relatively stable over time. People are making between 2 and 3 journeys a day. But then what we do is we ask them very detailed questions about every single one of those journeys. And from that we ask them, what mode of transport they used, what distance they traveled, what the purpose of their journey was. And by kind of combining these things, we can start looking at very specific behaviours. So, and I suppose so far what we've really been interested in is what we might think of as energy wasting behaviours, or cases where people are using energy when they might not need to. So for travel, that would be, for example, using the car for very short journeys. And I've shown here on the left, the percentage of people who are using the car for journeys under 2 kilometers, and on the right, for under 5 kilometers when there was public transport available. And that's in one given day. So it's actually, it's quite a lot of people. About 1 in 6 people in any given day are using the car for very short journeys. And because we then ask them, not only about their behavior, but other questions about themselves, we can start to look at who these people are and who's more likely to be making these journeys. So in the case of these short car journeys, it's, people living in urban areas or middle-aged, higher income, female, and probably, unsurprisingly, they're more likely to have a child under 18 in the household. In terms of home heating then, we ask people, first of all, what types of heating they used the previous day. Obviously, a lot of people using central heating, fewer using different types of heating. And again, we ask some detailed follow-up questions about each. And again, we can kind of look for these cases where people are using energy when they might not need to. So in this case, we're looking at people who heated empty rooms or had the heating on when nobody was at home. And again, it's quite a large proportion of people, about over a third of them are heating empty rooms or an empty home in a given day. And this time when we look at who it is, it's more likely to be people living as a family unit of higher social grades, and again in urban areas. And then the last kind of bit of behaviour I'll talk about is appliance use. So we ask people about a whole range of different appliances that they might use in the home. Here I've just shown 3 of the big electrical appliances, so the washing machine, the dryer, and the dishwasher. And if they said that they use these, we ask them some follow-up questions, and then we can start looking at, for example, who's using these appliances in an inefficient way. So in the case of the washing machine or the dishwasher, it might be not using the eco settings, or putting it on when it's not full, or washing your clothes at higher temperatures. And by combining all these, we can look at who's using these appliances inefficiently, and it's again in a given day, it's like about half people are doing this, so it's very prevalent. And when we look at what might make people more or less likely to be doing this, education is a factor here. So people with lower education levels are more likely to use appliances inefficiently. They're more likely to be outside Dublin, more likely to be women, although that's probably because they're more likely to be using the appliances in the first place. Before I finish up, I'll just show you a couple of the results from the other questions that we ask in the survey. So first of all, around campaign awareness, so whether people are aware of the Reduce Your Use campaign. And we asked them, you can see the darker line on the top is whether they say they saw any sort of government ad campaign at all. The lighter line on the bottom is a bit more of a stringent test where we actually get them to pick it out and check they really know what they're talking about. So you can see awareness has kind of trended up over time. More people are aware now than in December. And then what we can do is also relate this back to some of the behaviours that we were looking at. So for example, people who said that they recalled seeing the Reduce Your Use campaign were less likely to have their thermostat set at 21 degrees or higher, which we can't establish causality there. We can't say it's because they saw the ad, but at least it's a positive relationship. But we didn't see any relationship with any of the other behaviours that we were looking at. And then the last couple of results I'll show you are around energy deprivation. So this is maybe a slightly different thing that we're hoping to do with this survey, is to track energy deprivation over time. So obviously there's a lot of research done on energy poverty and energy deprivation, but it tends to be done on a kind of, over a longer period of time rather than seeing how this fluctuates over the course of the year. So we asked people about their monthly disposable income, and we asked them about their monthly energy costs. And from that, we can see what proportion of their income they are spending on energy costs. And I guess a commonly used metric for energy poverty is people who spend 10% or more of their income on energy. And you can see by that measure, we've got like over half the population energy poverty, which maybe it's not like a perfect measure, but even if we look at people who are spending more than 20% of their income on energy, it's still almost a third of the population. So obviously energy costs are a big burden for people at the moment. And we also take some more subjective measures of energy deprivation as well. So we asked people, how difficult they found it to pay their most recent energy bill. And there again, we can see, it's over a third of people who are having at least some difficulty paying their energy bills. So that, backs up the more quantitative results as well. So as I said, it's kind of early days for this survey, and there's a lot we can do with it. But in terms of what we've learned so far, I think the main thing for me has been, realizing that it's not one type of person that's wasting energy or saving energy across the board. When we look at all these different energy wasting behaviors, it's always kind of different people in each case, and it seems to be much more driven by, lifestyle factors rather than any sort of innate motivation to, save energy or, protect the environment. And then, unsurprisingly, energy costs are a burden for a large section of society. And then in terms of future directions, the next thing for us is, looking at the energy usage of different types of people, given that lifestyle factors are so important, and trying to identify what are the things different types of people could be doing to save energy, so we can, create messaging that's more targeted towards specific people. And then obviously over the course of the year, we need to look for seasonal changes as well and link to weather data, for example. So that's pretty much it. As I mentioned, these are just a couple of the studies that we've been running. We do have some other research ongoing, which I'll just mention really quickly. So we've got some research around encouraging heat pump uptake, specifically in oil-heated homes that are considered heat pump ready. So that should hopefully be low-hanging fruit to get to switch to a heat pump. And we also are working with our marketing team to develop a community-based social marketing pilot to promote home retrofitting. So we're going to evaluate that with the field trial later this year. So as I said, that's it. I mean, if there's one thing you should take away from this session, I think it's just, coming back to what Dara was saying at the start, that, behavioural change is going to be crucial for achieving net zero. Even if you've got a new technology, you need people to adopt that technology, you need people to use it correctly. So behaviour change is essential. And, and people don't always expect as we behave. So that's why we need behavioural science and behavioural economics. And in the Behavioural Economics unit at SEAI, we try and better our understanding of energy-related behaviour by reviewing existing evidence and generating our new evidence ourselves. And then our findings are used to design evidence-based policies and programs that are hopefully more likely to be effective at changing energy behaviour. Thank you very much. Happy to take any questions. And yeah, all our publications and everything are up on the website. And if anyone wants to get in contact, please do. That's our email. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thanks very much for the presentation. Very interesting. I'm really disappointed and even disillusioned to hear that there's you weren't able to identify one particular type of person, category of person that might be more motivated than others. And I'm sure there's many people in this room who'd say, well, I'm in that category because, we're all in the energy sector. There'd be people who I would imagine people who typically vote Green Party would be more likely to say that their behaviour would be more environmentally friendly in general. Are you saying that that doesn't exist? You've proven that doesn't exist? Or you didn't maybe screen in that way to provide you with some sort of basis of comparison? Thank you.
Yeah, so I guess there's a couple of points there. On the one hand, it's not saying that it doesn't exist, it's just saying that other factors override those almost. So like you might, be as worried about climate change as you want, but if you've got a kid that you need to bring to school and the only way you can get there is in a car, that's just always going to override it, So it's not saying motivation doesn't play a factor at all. And actually travel is probably where it plays a little bit more of a role in terms of the environmental motivation, but it's more just saying that these other factors override them. And the other point to make is that, we're looking at a sample of 1,000 people each month. So in terms of, how specific we can get, we can't get down to like something that's going to be 2% of the population, because it's just not going to show up in the data as being significant. But when we're talking about broader groups, at the end of the survey, I didn't mention there, but we do ask people like, how worried are you about climate change? How worried are you about cost of living? And it's just generally when we try and, when we run regression models on it and we try and look at how those relate to behavior, they generally don't, or, if they do, it's a much smaller effect than everything else. Yeah.
We saw a really useful graphic of the customer journey there and the different barriers that customers have to overcome to retrofit their homes. Is one key area that you might have looked at the availability of rental properties? That is a key barrier, especially if the customer needs a long period of time to retrofit their home for a deep retrofit, for example. Is that something that you identified, and did you have any policy recommendations on that?
Yeah, so that came up. So I guess in terms of, that split incentive between landlords and tenants. So, typically if you're just a normal homeowner, you invest a certain amount of money and you reap the benefits in terms of, having a more comfortable home and bills. But yeah, in the case of renting, there's a split incentive where the landlord is paying the upfront cost and the tenant is, the one who's benefiting, and therefore there's a problem in terms of incentives for landlords. And this is one of the problems we kind of haven't solved in the report, just because it's so dependent on the rental market functioning in the first place. There are a couple of recommendations made, for example, that homes be advertised, rental homes be advertised as warm rent. So instead of just seeing the price listing of the rent, it also includes, an estimate of what the energy bills would be per month. Now, in a well-functioning, rental market, that would be a strong incentives for landlord to invest in the energy efficiency of their property. Obviously, at the moment, we don't have a well-functioning market, so the potential for that sort of solution to have an impact is probably fairly limited. So yeah, we recognize the problem. The solution is a better rental market, basically, yeah.
Thank you. I know in Scotland they're worried about what they call green evictions or reno evictions. Did you make any recommendations so that landlords wouldn't be in or the incentive to put out a tenant and raise the rent would be minimised?
Yeah, happy to have a go at that one. It's not something we really thought about with this work. I guess is the short answer. Thinking through how that would affect landlord versus tenant incentives, I guess, is probably something that, it's not something we've thought about. I guess we're very much focused on retrofitting decisions. I suppose, like any, if it's not really something we've talked about.
If I just add to that, though, I guess that brings up an important point of the kind of work that we do, in that, this is kind of looking at it from one perspective. It's a behavioural perspective. If you want people to retrofit, this is what you do. It's not considering lots of other impacts. So that's why this report has 22 solutions, that could potentially, increase retrofitting in the country. That doesn't mean that they should be then taken and implemented. It means, it needs to be taken as one piece of evidence and other things considered as well.
Just a quick question. You mentioned that 37% of people heat empty rooms on a given day. And I was just wondering if there was a difference between buildings that have been retrofitted and those that haven't. Is there more people heating empty rooms after retrofitting than before, or is there any change?
Yeah, that isn't something we've looked at. We could probably, it's something we could start to look at in the data. We do ask people about their BER rating. Obviously, a lot of people don't actually know their BER rating, but they're probably more likely to know it if it's good. So yeah, we haven't looked at that, but that would certainly be one avenue for research, is looking at how people behave around home heating depending on what the energy rating of their home actually is. So yeah, be interesting.
I suppose I would just add to that I think it's only about half of the sample reported their BER. So and then it's a self-reported, so it would be for a select portion of the sample. But I think there's some interesting questions there around the energy poverty dimension as well, and looking at the energy efficiency of the building in addition to people's ability to meet their energy bills, and and so there's kind of potential to kind of cut the data in different ways, basically, to look at different questions. And like if people have questions they're interested in, like that, please get in touch, and we're happy to take them on.
Sorry, just on the subject of energy poverty, because I know a lot of the social justice organisations in Ireland would say that that 10% doesn't hold for our population, that actually just people aren't choosing to heat their homes, But I often thought with the SEAI's Warmer Homes initiative, particularly if you're installing a heat pump, that actually, is there any possibility you'd add solar PV to what's installed, to help people pay their bills?
Yeah, no, I take that one. I think like the one thing that energy poverty, people who work on it, people who research it, the one thing they all agree on is that all of the metrics that we use to measure it are flawed in some way or another. And the 10% metric, kind of originated in the UK in the early 90s, and it's widely acknowledged that it's a flawed measure, because it doesn't capture exactly as you said. If people are curtailing their heating or curtailing other things, then they might be technically not energy poor by that metric, but actually are energy deprived. So that's a big problem. In our data, we can actually look at the relationship between deprivation and poverty. And we can also look at so we just presented the 10% measure, but we can look at the distribution of energy costs and income to see really what proportion of people's income are they paying on energy costs. How many how many are above the 10%, how many are below the 10%, but cut it in different ways. And also look at, for those people that are technically not energy poor, are they curtailing other things? Are they curtailing not just their energy costs, but are they cutting back on other essentials? So there's different things we can do. Regards the warmer home scheme, that's a question I could take to the team in terms of, I'm not sure about what their plans are in terms of including other measures, but certainly that's something we can take away. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks everybody.